Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Allie Bonar. Allie is the co-founder and CEO of Oat Haus, the first ever spreadable granola. Think the texture of nut butter, but the warm, familiar taste of granola. She founded Oat Haus back in 2018 as it was part of her recovery journey from disordered eating. She searched high and low for a nut-free spread that resonated with her, but couldn't find one. She came up with the idea to create one out of oats, and granola butter was born. Now, Oat Haus is sold at over 5,000 retailers across the country, including Whole Foods Market, Publix, Amazon, and Target. All of this has earned her a much-deserved 2024 EY Entrepreneur of the Year award. Prior to Oat Haus, she thought she would be a doctor. She studied pre-med at the University of California Berkeley, earning a bachelor's degree in nutritional sciences. While she ultimately decided not to become a doctor, she did continue in digital health for a few years, working in marketing at Doximity, the largest medical network. Allie is also very open on Instagram, and she actually did have her own podcast, so I really recommend everyone to check that out, where she is just she's an open book, and I absolutely love that. And I'm excited, Allie, to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Aw, thanks so much for having me, and thank you to everyone who's listening.
Of course. So, Allie, what I love to do, and by the way, I'm so excited for this. I have so much that we're going to dive into, but first, tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Who were you as a child? What type of kid were you?
Yeah, I was a nerd. Obviously went to Berkeley. I'm sure you were as well, going to Stanford. Didn't really drink, didn't party much in high school, very sheltered. But I love playing volleyball. That's the sport that I actually was committed to play in college. I was committed to play at Boston College. Ended up decommitting because I got into Berkeley for academics and, a little bit better academic school. So that's where I ended up going. But yeah, I just loved hanging out with my family. Like I loved my parents, weirdly enough, loved my friends, and grew up in San Diego. So just beach bum, always in the water, miss it a lot every day. I'm now in the Midwest, which is not the same, unfortunately, but it has its own perks. And yeah, I was a big foodie too. I mean, looking back, it's interesting. I don't know if you experienced this, but it's like, as a kid, I had so many journals. I was like constantly sharing about what was going on in my life. I even had like a blog when I was in middle school, like before blogs were really a thing. I loved food photography. I loved baking. So it's just interesting how those themes continued into obviously what I'm doing today. Kind of had a meandering path to get back here. But yeah, hindsight, it's interesting how I've always been interested in food.
Yeah.
Yeah, sharing my experience online, which now I do as a content creator on the side.
And did that come from your parents, your mom? Did that influence come in other ways, or was it more of just a self journey that you discovered your love for food?
Yeah, no, definitely. My mom did not cook. She was, I think it almost like skips a generation sometimes. Like her mom was a big cook and, always in the kitchen. And so I think my mom was kind of like anti. And then because my mom was always making us like cereal for dinner, then I was like, all right, someone needs to step it up here. So yeah, my mom was really busy. She was an entrepreneur. She was a dentist. She opened her own practice. And so she really instilled a lot of that in me. But yeah, not the foodie side at all. She kind of lives or eats to live. But I think, yeah, it just always came from within. And unfortunately, I think a lot of it really was due to my issues with food. Like a lot of it was fear driven too, which I'm happy to talk about, super open about. But a lot of it was just, I was so creative and, I ended up going pre-med, which was so funny because I'm not a science person. Like I really struggled my way through school. I mean, I obviously got into Berkeley, so I did well prior to that, but I think I just was swimming upstream and I thought I should be a doctor. It's like the perfect example of like what you think you should do because society values, medicine and making money and prestige. And for me, it was also like a security, financial security thing, which is hilarious because now I'm an entrepreneur, which is like the complete opposite of like secure and stable. But I really struggled. And I think I really suppressed my natural talents and abilities, which was creativity, because that's just not what obviously capitalism a lot of times, prioritizes and ties value to. So yeah, looking back, it's like I have that little girl inside of me so much with what I'm doing today. And I'm really proud that I honored that eventually. I mean, I'm 32, so like it took a while, but yeah, it all ties back.
Yeah. And you mentioned, let's dive into that, right? Because I think a lot of people are the same where they have to do pre-med or be a lawyer. You know, there still are these jobs that suggest security, and then we go down that path. Meanwhile, you know, probably putting away passion and maybe subduing your creativity. So tell me a little bit about that journey of choosing pre-med, going to Berkeley, studying nutritional sciences, ultimately saying, you know what, I don't know, is this my passion or do I still need to do this? How are you thinking through that?
For sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with that. And also, on the other side, I think there are people who, like, I have tons of friends that are in iBanking and they're lawyers and finance, and they're like, look, I'm not 100%, I'm not so passionate about what I'm doing, but they, you know, it's not fulfilling their, you know, their deep soul's purpose, but they, you know, financially it provides them to then do hobbies and have extracurriculars that do fulfill those things. So I think people find it different ways. I'm not saying everyone needs to, you know, start their own company and like become an entrepreneur, because it's also really fucking hard. But I think, yeah, for me, like I ended up working at Doximity, which, as you mentioned, is like a health tech company. And on paper, you know, it was amazing. It was everything I should have wanted and more. Like pay wise, benefits wise, you know, I guess like prestige, it was like one of the top, or is still,
Right.
you know, really fast growing company. But I just, yeah, something inside me, it was like that scratch wasn't being itched, and I wasn't completely fulfilled, and I didn't know why. Because at that time, I never, still didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. Like I thought everyone just had these, you know, entrepreneurial ideas as they're like walking down the street and kind of looking at the world and seeing ways you could improve it. But I think, yeah, it like I should have listened to my inner voice early on, and that's something that I've really strengthened over time. So when I was at Cal, you know, I failed OChem the first time. I had like, and it's not that I wasn't trying. It's like I had 3 tutors and I was like going to office hours, and, you know, being someone who got straight A's my whole life, like it was devastating. And I should have listened to my inner voice saying like, you're obviously, number one, you're not good at this. Like put your ego aside. And number two, you're not interested in it. And, you know, I think it's like, but for some reason I was just, we always think that our inner voice is wrong, and everyone else around us knows more about our own journey than we do. So it took a while. And then, you know, I started volunteering at hospitals, and I was like, I hate blood. I hate sick people. I hate, you know, the hospital setting. So it's like, it's funny, almost comical looking back, because it's like, girl, like I wish I could have shaken myself and be like, wake the fuck up. Like, what are you doing? But I think it's like a learning process. We all are on our own path. Unfortunately, like mine took a while. And so, yeah, where Oat Haus came in was, you know, I was deeply struggling with food. I'm super open about it. And we can go into it more, but yeah, essentially, you know, orthorexia, exercise addiction, binge eating, like you name it, I struggled with it. I was living in San Francisco at the time, like should have been, you know, the peak of my life, like making a ton of money, single, you know, or not single, sorry, I was dating Eric, but I mean like living alone. And just like, you know, had a bunch of friends around me, but yet I was trapped in like this mental prison that I had created for myself. And so, yeah, I think like where our company came in was through my recovery and that whole journey. So it's like everything happens for a reason, but at the time you're kind of just like, why me? Like, why is this happening to me?
Absolutely. So, Allie, take me through that. And first of all, I have to say you are very open about your disordered eating, like you mentioned, which I just have to say, like, it has probably helped so many people being open. So thank you for that. And when you look back, when did it first originate? Was it first studying nutritional sciences and almost creating this obsession with healthy eating, or was it even before that?
When did my struggles with food originate?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, it was so early on. Like, I think, you know, growing up in the generation, it was so many different factors, right? But it's like, I would say maybe middle school to high school is when I just started to become aware of my body. And like you said, being an athlete, you know, unfortunately, I think it is really common. And like I played volleyball, so we were wearing these like tiny little spandex shorts. That was like one thing. Growing up in San Diego, just like always being in a bikini and always like, you know, being on the beach. And obviously like Southern California has sort of this pressure, and a lot of people, you know, LA, et cetera, like people tend
Totally.
to like look a certain way, and it attracts like the most attractive like aspiring actors in the country. So yeah, you're just skewed on like what normal is. But yeah, I think it started there. Also, like I grew up in that era of America's Next Top Model, all these magazines, like
Yeah.
people, I feel like nowadays, I'm so grateful for like Gen Z and these, like, following generations, because they don't stand up, or that, they don't like put up with that stuff. It's like, you can't, body shame people anymore, thank God. And at the time it was super normal. So anyways, it was a combination of a lot of things. I would say lastly, the way that my mom talked about her own body, and her and I've had this
Yeah.
conversation, so it's like nothing she doesn't know, and she's grown a lot. But I think that generation just I looked up to her so much. Like she was my mom. She was like this perfect angel to me growing up. And so she never said anything negative to me about my body, which I know is not always the case. Like some people unfortunately
Yeah.
have that experience, but I still like, kids are like sponges, and I just watched her like completely trash and tear herself down, in the mirror. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
okay, so is that how you're supposed to act as a woman, et cetera. So anyways, it was a lot of different things. And
Yeah.
I think too, like just personality type, like I'm really hard on myself, kind of like type A perfectionistic. So it really was this perfect storm. And so then,
Totally.
and also, sorry, there's like a lot that goes into it, but also,
No, this is great.
yeah, it's also like, the control thing. So, like I think a lot of people, it's really not even about the food, but it's like just something you can control when life feels so out of control and chaotic, which it so often does. So there
Yeah.
was a lot. And I think I've only just learned and started to peel back the layers like years after and years into recovery. It's not something that I realized as I was going through it, of course. Um, but yeah, I think it's multifaceted and different for everyone.
And when did recovery, that journey into recovery look like for you? And at what point were you like, you know what, this is actually, there's a problem and I have to deal with this. How did that look for you?
Yeah, it was a while. There's a theme in my life, which is I don't figure things out right away. Yeah, I would say, about 10 years in, crazy enough, because also I think people really talk down, having an eating disorder, which it's a terrible thing, but it also was my lifeline in so many instances, and it was my survival mechanism in so many instances. Um, I was never taught how to handle my negative emotions. I grew up with two parents that were very like genuinely happy go lucky. And so whenever I was sad, they were like, oh, let's go get ice cream and make you feel better. So it's like, okay, I tied, okay, when you're sad, you eat ice cream. And yeah, just never had the skills or the tools to like sit with and feel my feelings. And so I think, yeah, there was a lot of that too. But in terms of recovery, like I was sick of living in that mental prison, as I mentioned. And I
Yeah.
knew there had to be a better way. And obviously it was so scary because it's like, this is all I had ever known for so long. But at the same time, I just knew that I couldn't continue on and keep living that way. And I think the hardest part about struggling with food is the fear of other people finding out, the complete isolation. Like, I thought I was the only one going through this. And,
Yeah.
I kept it in for so long too. And so that's why also I didn't, I struggled with it for so long because I was really good at hiding it. Like, I think being a nutrition student, I just kind of masqueraded it as, oh, I just love eating healthy. And everyone around me was praising me for my willpower. When I'm in college, everyone's eating chicken fingers and I'm like subsisting only on salads. But then inside, I'm like, I want to be like you guys. Like, I want to feel the freedom to just, eat chicken fingers and not like rip myself to shreds after mentally. So it's interesting. And I think like, I don't know. I think there was that little voice inside of me. And for some reason, I decided to listen to it 10 years in. So I did end up reaching out for help. This woman who was based in San Francisco, where I was living at the time, she's amazing. And, she was the first person I told. Like, and I feel like so much of my healing just even happened in that moment where it was like this boulder I'd been carrying around for 10 years was just lifted off my shoulders. And as soon as
Wow.
I started talking and like ripped off that Band-Aid, you couldn't shut me up about it. And so, even to this day, like I'll talk about it with anyone because I think that was like I just was searching for that when I was struggling, was someone else out there sharing their story and making me feel like, oh, I'm not alone, because no one was. Like, it was like the time of social media where everyone was like, it's all good, I'm perfect, my life is perfect. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. And it's weird. I just like took a very deep breath as you were describing that, as you were lifting and taking that boulder off your shoulders. And Allie, you've been very open about this too. And you ended up finding a therapist who taught you, ultimately got you out of this journey, like helped you on the recovery journey. Can you talk a bit about the power of therapy? And also, I love that phrase you say, which is feel your feelings. And what does that mean a little bit? And then obviously we'll get into Oat Haus, but just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm such a big proponent of therapy. And I think that's another thing that maybe is a little different about our generation versus like our parents. Because I remember when I first told my mom, like, oh, I'm going to start going to therapy, she was like, is everything okay? What's wrong? And I'm like, no, 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 it's like preventative, which is hilarious because there obviously was a lot of things wrong. But yeah, I think like it really, I mean, now Eric and I are doing couples therapy. But I did like solo, just like one-on-one therapy for a couple years. I've done psychedelic, assisted therapy, which was incredibly happy to talk about that, like the most profound experience of my entire life. But yeah, huge proponent. And in terms of feeling your feelings, I know it's like, it sounds so nebulous, and I think it's actually way harder than it sounds. It's like, just feel your feelings. And it's like, what does that actually look like? Because number one, no one wants to do that. It's so uncomfortable, myself, even to this day included. It's much easier to reach for, a bag of chips or ice cream and like get that instant dopamine and just distract, numb, avoid. But one really important metaphor that, and kind of visual that has stuck with me that I don't even remember who told me initially, probably one of my therapists in the past, but emotions are like a beach ball, and like you can only hold it underwater for so long until it blows back, and smacks you in the face. And really the only way out is through. So one thing that was really helpful for me was somatic therapy, which is like body-based therapy. And because I'm someone who, like, there's so much going on up here. I'm an overthinker, and I can like talk my way out or around of anything. And so I found that in talk therapy, I was actually like, I don't know, it wasn't like I was feeling my feelings because I was kind of avoiding and talking around it. And somatic therapy, you can't do that because essentially what you're doing, you kind of get into this like deep meditative state. This is with someone who's like trained and knows way more than I do, but this was, by experience being a participant. And like, you kind of like, she'll start with like a body scan, and you're feeling into your body. So it's like, okay, where am I holding tension? Like right now, say for example, it's like your left shoulder, and then you'll start to like focus on that area. And I mean, this is over the course of like an hour and a half is like, you're focusing on this area, you're sending droplets of love to it. And over time, like you truly feel this area release. And I think what's so incredible about your body is it holds such wisdom that your mind like doesn't even really realize. It holds traumas, it holds experiences, so that was really powerful for me because it was like very confronting to, become face to face with like all these feelings that I had been holding in my body for so long. So highly recommend that. Other things, I mean, I'm someone who loves to either talk it out. So like I'll record, like a video diary on my phone. It's like, I don't post it anywhere. It's kind of just to like get it out.
Yeah.
Or if you're someone who likes to write, like, journaling is really great. Because I think sometimes feelings can feel so big and heavy up here in our heads. But then once we get them out onto paper and have that separation, it's like, oh my gosh, this is why it's not a big deal, and you're able to look at it a little bit with some separation.
I love it. And this ultimately translated to your relationship with food and building a healthy relationship with food, because now you're actually internalizing and translating those feelings, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to squash them down and, get food or deal with that in that way.
100%. Like I used to be someone I was the girl that never cried. Like an outsider would be like, oh my God, that girl is so just bubbly, happy-go-lucky. And now, oh my God, I'm like crying at a commercial, like at the drop of the hat. Like I'm constantly crying, but it's like a release, and it's a healthy cycling of emotions. The second thing I haven't mentioned, I really was helpful for me was, especially with binge eating, incorporating more pleasure into my day-to-day. So it's like, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's like our American society, it's like, be productive, work hard, capitalism. And it's like pleasure and just fun and play and enjoyment is not necessarily like top of the totem pole. And so you really have to prioritize it. And when we're kids, our parents are always planning fun activities and events and sports for us. And so we're having fun all the time. And so once, you become an adult, all of a sudden you're like, why is this just laundry and taxes and bills? Like, where's the fun? And it's because we don't have anyone to plan it for us anymore. So we have to take on that role. And I know it can be kind of annoying. It's like, oh, another thing to add to my to-do list, but it also can be empowering. It's like, I'm an adult. I can craft and shape my day however I want it to look. And just incorporating, it doesn't have to be like, pleasure isn't always sexual. It's like, for me, like I know people are like, oh, coffee's good for you, it's bad for you. I don't care. It brings me so much happiness. I have a double shot of espresso with heavy whipping cream every single morning. And like, I savor that bad boy, like so intense. And it just brings me so much joy. Like I go to bed the night before dreaming about it. And it's just those little moments. Like it doesn't have to cost a lot of money or a lot of time. But it's little things that bring you joy, instead of just relying on food all the time. And that really helps.
Absolutely. I love it. Okay, let's get into Oat Haus. So you were at Doximity where I think that first seed was planted. Walk me a little bit through that initial stages, that founding journey of Oat Haus, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. Doximity was a great experience. Obviously not the food industry, but I think, I was an early employee there. So seeing just like a fast growing tech startup, I was with them until, right before they IPO'd. And so that was incredible. I learned a lot. And I think it also sparked, like, I was so fascinated with their founders, and not from like a, like, oh, wow, like the founders of a company. It was kind of like inspired in terms of like, I could do that, like, why isn't that me? Like, I think that like, so that was one thing that just, a switch was flipped. And then the second thing was, because I wasn't feeling 100% fulfilled, I was filling my nights and weekends with like shooting this really over the top kind of beautiful like smoothie bowl content and stuff for my Instagram, which at the time, like I had no idea influencers existed, didn't know you could monetize. It was like the Wild West, like 2016, 2017. And, but for me, it was a creative outlet, and it was a way, without even me knowing it at the time, that I was starting to play with my food, and I was starting to bring more like fun and ease into eating, because it was just so rigid and stressful for me for so many years. So then I started to, gain some followers on my Instagram, because I was talking very openly about my recovery process, and quickly realized like, this is what lights me up, like the creative side, sharing, building community. But at the time I still didn't like plan on leaving. I didn't have any business ideas. Like granola butter really fell into my lap. And the way that happened was, I was really looking for a nut-free spread, because I was having a hard time digesting nuts. Like my body was, as you can imagine, not in the best place, like just health-wise at the time, because I was restricting everything, binging everything. So I was really just disappointed with the options on the market that were nut-free. It's like sunflower seed butter, soy nut butter. And so had this epiphany, because oat milk was popping up everywhere. Like Oatly, you couldn't escape it. It's like every coffee shop, every corner. And I'm like, okay, if they could make a milk out of oats, like I could definitely make a spread out of oats. And I just love oats as an ingredient because they're flavor neutral. They're like this blank canvas that you can just take in a million different flavor directions. And I thought that was really inspiring as a spread, because every peanut butter you try, even if it's say like, cookie dough peanut butter, chocolate peanut butter, at the end of the day, you just taste the peanuts. Like, and right. So I think with our product, that's why we've had a lot of success in retail, is because like the Target buyer brought us in because she was like, your product actually tastes like brownie batter. It doesn't taste like chocolate flavored peanut butter. And so that's been really exciting. But anyways, back to the beginning was, I had this idea. I couldn't make it a reality because like I knew what it was going to taste like at the end, but I just couldn't make it happen. I'm, a foodie, but I'm not a chef. So we brought Ari on, who's our third co-founder, and he was opening a restaurant in Paris at the time. He went to Jewish summer camp with Eric, my partner, which is like where all true friendships are born, and he has worked at Michelin star restaurants as a chef. So like amazing culinary, genius. So we brought him on, and he like took the recipe to the next level. Eric, came on, he was working in consulting at the time, and he was kind of this like engineer, technical brain. And then I was like marketing, fun, like branding, like the creative side. So we had this trifecta, we had this idea, and we were still working our 9 to 5s. And, for the first year, we just did it nights and weekends. Then we got into Whole Foods. That was our first retailer. And I think,
So,
yeah.
so first, Allie, by that point, how long were you and Eric dating?
Yeah, that was about 4 years we had been together.
Okay. And was that something that you even thought of and, came into your mind at that point of saying, okay, should we do this when we're dating? Is that too hard? Is it stepping on, too many toes? Did that come into your mind?
Yeah, it's funny. People yeah, because I mean, even when we were raising money from investors, like everyone's concern is like, oh my gosh, you guys are a couple, like how is this gonna work? And it's like,
Totally.
I don't think it's for everyone. I will say, I like thinking back on past ex boyfriends that I've had, like, oh my God, could never work with some of them. But, Eric and I have such a special dynamic in terms of, number one, just objectively in terms of like skill sets, we complement each other perfectly. Like he's like the bioengineer brain, I'm like the marketing creative brain. But also we're just not the type of people that have this like really volatile, fiery, arguing and fighting all the time relationship. Like we're both just like really realistic people. Like we rarely fight. It's like, we're good communicators. So and at the same time, like I think a lot of people don't realize that when you're building a business together, it's your baby. And it's like this really incredible bonding experience. And I can't imagine starting and growing this company if he was still working at Accenture, like as a consultant, because I'd be like, you don't understand, like you don't get it. And so now it's really cool because obviously we both have this shared lived experience. And almost trauma bonded in so many ways. But but I would say, at the time, I mean, I think it was just one of those things where we just didn't know where it was going to go. It was like a fun idea. We were all still working full time. We were like, this is cool. No one's ever done this before. Like Eric's super entrepreneurial. I, unknowingly was very entrepreneurial, and we just both were excited and thrilled to like try it out and see where it went. And so I think where it's grown just surpassed like all of our wildest expectations.
And at the time, in those early days, while you guys all had full-time jobs, working in nights and weekends on Oat Haus, who were you showing it to? Who was trying it? Was it just friends and family, or were you actually giving it to strangers to almost get some validation for you guys?
Yeah, it's funny. One of my favorite stories is still working at Doximity, and we wanted really authentic customer feedback before we even launched pre-orders or anything. These were like our first iterations. So I actually, at the time, people at Doximity knew I was kind of doing this like food blog content creation thing on the side. So I told everyone, hey, this food brand, this like big food brand it's anonymous. I can't tell you their name. They're launching this like new product, and they wanted me to get kind of, unsolicited customer feedback, or anonymous customer feedback. And so, I brought in this like unlabeled jar, gave them all samples. And the feedback was so brutally honest. Like I just remember people, because it was our first few iterations it was trash. And like people trying it and they're just like, this tastes like wet sand, or, that was like one that just is burned in my brain forever. And people were not really a fan. So it was good though. And it was like great feedback. And then I remember I had this little red, VW convertible bug, and I'm like driving up and down the hills of San Francisco, and I'm like calling my friends, like come outside. I just like throw them a jar. And then I drive away, and the next friend, throw them a jar. And I was like, try this and text me in a week with your thoughts. So we were constantly collecting feedback from friends, from coworkers. And then when we launched pre-orders, it was 100% on Instagram. And the reason for that was because I had gained like a small following, 10,000 followers or so, from sharing my recovery. And I was like, this is perfect. This is a perfect little test market launchpad, just to see if people are interested in this product. Like, do they even want this or understand what it is? Because look, I'm the first to admit it's a very wacky idea. And people understood and got it right away. And I think that's not the case for all innovative ideas. Either you're like, it's wrong timing, or it's just a little too weird.
Right.
But what I found with our product, why it worked, was because it's like this perfect Venn diagram of just, innovative, new, exciting, and familiar. Like Americana is like granola, peanut butter, and you're kind of mixing those two. And so it's like just weird enough, but it's not too weird. And then we had really familiar flavors. Obviously, it's like cookie dough, birthday cake, these flavors that people just know what they taste like. So that was, the early days.
And even, getting that feedback of this tastes like wet sand, did you guys ever have a moment of, okay, what are we doing? Like maybe let's just go back to full-time job? Or was there just constant, we're going to get it right, this is going to happen? Like how was it mentally for you guys?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think, okay, one of the traits I will say that has helped me become, an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say like, I still don't even feel it's like not even successful entrepreneur. It's like just, I think baseline to be an entrepreneur, you have to be delusional. You have to be so I don't even know what the word is, just so, your mind has to be so set on this product and you have to almost be a little delusional because you're going to hear so much feedback. And I'm not saying this is even a good quality trait, but like I've found with a lot of entrepreneurs, they're like pit bulls. They're so focused on this one thing and they're like, I don't care what anyone says. I'm going to make this happen. And I think it can be a beautiful thing or it can be really hard because it's like maybe people do have good feedback for you. And sometimes you think your product is like perfect. And, but I think we were open to the feedback, but we just knew we were onto something and we just knew like if there's a will, there's a way. And I think one thing that has really helped us continue to grow to where we are is Eric, Ari, and I all share this trait of we have so much grit. So it's like whatever happens, we're going to figure it out. And, we've slept on the floor of the facility more times than we can count. It's like we've moved our lives to Philly, to Cleveland. We don't know anyone here. We don't care. Like we picked up everything and we've moved. Like we'll do anything for this business. That's one thing. And second thing is problem solving. It's like none of us were in manufacturing before. None of us started a food company before, but like we figured it out. We're like, if other people can do it, so can we, and now we have Google, we have the internet, we can search and figure out anything. Yeah. So I think with those two things, like that really helped. But yeah, like early days, I mean, we probably did 100+ iterations before we landed on something that we were like, this is it, this we can sell. And even to this day, our product looks vastly different than it did in 2018 when we launched.
I love it. I love it. And also, like you said, grit and delusion, I think those are probably the two key ingredients of being a founder. So I'm so happy you touched on that. And okay, at what point did you say to yourself, you know what, let's leave Doximity and let's go full-time into this? At what points were those give you that confidence?
Yeah. When we launched into Whole Foods, that is when, yeah. And I think it was like, or not when we launched, when we got word from the buyer that we were going to launch. It was still a couple months before we launched. But like, I think having that validation from one of the biggest retailers in the country, okay, there's something here, right? Like, and what the hell am I doing? I can't do both jobs. Like I can't do either job well. I wasn't doing either job well. And so, yeah, I ended up quitting Doximity. Eric was still actually working at Accenture for another 6 months after that because he was just on the bench and like trying to avoid getting placed on a project and no one was really noticing. So he was still getting paid this whole time, which like anyone who works in consulting, like for a big company knows, I'm sure how that all works. So that was great. So he was kind of like funding us while, we weren't making money yet. And then I was also making money through my Instagram, just through like not a ton, believe me, like, I was living in my parents' house for a while, but like small brand deals and, paid posts. It was like at the time where people saw influencers posting something and they actually like went to the store and bought it. Influencer was a lot more, had a lot more pull then. But yeah, and then, Ari pretty immediately was full-time actually from when we had the idea because he had to be recipe testing and everything. So we were paying him like as much as we could in the early days, which was not a lot. But that, I think we just realized, and as soon as I left Doximity, it was like, oh my gosh, why have I been waiting this whole time,
Absolutely.
But I am a fan.
And what was that process like of getting into Whole Foods? And how was that feeling when you got that email or, whatever it may have been from the Whole Foods buyer saying, let's try it out?
Yeah. I will say, I think our naivete, not knowing much about the food industry really did help us because knowing what I know now, the way that I reached out was like so embarrassing and just kind of hilarious. But I was like, oh, I'm going to go on LinkedIn and find the Whole Foods buyer. And just so everyone knows, like the way that you get into a grocery store is you pay a broker and they take a, commission. they work directly with the retailers. Like there's this whole process that you're supposed to go. We've never done that until, now. But I just like found her name on LinkedIn, no email. So I just started doing, okay, different email formats. Like what is not going to give me a bounce back basically? Because I'm like, every company has their set email format. So as long as I just unlock, crack the code, then I can email her. Months go by, like didn't hear from her. Finally, I get an email back like, oh, interesting. Love to try samples. This was like the best day of my life. I didn't realize that her asking for samples was like step, 0. Like there's so much we had to do before we got on shelves. But at that moment I was like, we're getting into Whole Foods. Not true. So like the retail process is so slow. That's the whole thing. Like typically stores only review your category once a year. So if you miss that category review for like our category spreads, it's like the peanut butter section, then you don't get another shot until a year later, which means you'll probably be on shelf like almost 2 years later. It's just insane. I didn't know any of this at the time. So luckily I just, divine timing. She loves the samples. She wants to bring us in. I got the email when we were headed to our first Expo West, which is like Coachella for CPG. And we were, exhibiting at this show. We're in the Uber on the way there, about to set up our booth. And I got the email that we are launching in 50 Whole Foods stores, which was a huge deal at the time. It like seemed like so many stores, which is funny because now we're in 5,000. So it was just one little region of Whole Foods. It was like Southern California, basically. And we were just screaming, jumping for joy. But at the same time, we're like, oh my God, how are we going to make all this product? Because it was just us 3 founders making everything by hand in Vitamix blenders still at this time, in like a pay by the hour commissary kitchen.
I love it.
Yeah, we figured it out.
Love it. And Allie, like you said, so much self-learning. Like I imagine the learning curve was so incredibly high because building a CPG company is, not an easy feat. And there's a food scientist. There's all these different things that come into play. How did you learn? Was it primarily Google? Did you reach out to people? What was your main mode of learning for this?
Yeah, I think the early days, it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of Google. We made so many mistakes, but we honestly had no connections or mentors in the industry. So, we didn't even know who to ask or like who to turn to. Over time, now we have, a cap table full of like female founders who have exited, advisors of similar companies in our, spreads category. Now we turn to those people so we don't make as many mistakes. But in the early days, it was just so many mistakes. Like I remember so distinctly one, this is kind of a crazy story, but we had just gotten in with Pressed Juicery. So we were like a topping on their freeze for a long time. And they were our first like massive account. And we ordered this machine on eBay, which was supposed to like 10x our production capacity and, automate like somewhat automation. It wasn't even close actually, but it was more than what we could make in a Vitamix blender. And Eric and I had our first vacation planned. We were going to Mexico for Thanksgiving. Like since we started the business, we had been grinding so hard. We were looking forward to this so much. And we, with this new machine, like making this order, the opening order for Pressed Juicery was going to take 2-3 days max. And so we budgeted for that. And the machine comes from eBay. It said it was in pristine condition, never been used before. And it's essentially, had never been used before, but was sitting in a warehouse that was moist or something. So the whole lid was just rusted shut and we couldn't open it, couldn't use it. And we had spent like $10,000 on this machine. And we were like, we ended up getting the money back because we had protections through eBay, thank God. But it like really fucked us for this order. So we had to make everything by hand in Vitamix blenders. And we were pulling like 20-hour shifts, all-nighters. My mom brought us Thanksgiving dinner to the facility one night. And like, anyways, we got it done. We ended up going on our vacation to Mexico, but it was so crazy. So that's like one example, one, mistake early on that I remember, very distinctly.
Absolutely. And it's good because looking back now, you can see, where you started to where you are today, which I hope that you can see, the growth and the progress and everything that's happened since. So, Allie, how did you come up with the name?
Our brand name or Granola Butter? Yeah. I mean, it's been also a journey. So when we started, our brand was Queen, Kween. That name came from just my Instagram handle, which was at the time Avo Queen, which there was no meaning behind that. It was just like the 2016, 2017 era. Like, oh, I love avocados and like, yes, queen, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So there was no intention behind that because at the time, as I mentioned earlier, like we didn't know this was going to be our full-time jobs. We were kind of just like, okay, fun, and I really liked the intention behind treat your body like royalty, that whole, and it was like that 2017 era of everything was white marble. And so that was like our aesthetic too. And we were making everything ourselves on Photoshop. Like there was no branding agency involved. But
Wow.
around 2021 is when we just started. I mean, the business was becoming, more serious. And we just all looked at each other and, looked at our brand, and there was no alignment there. Like we all are very colorful, loud, out of the box people. And we just felt like this white marble aesthetic, like that didn't match. We also, Queen, we felt was like kind of limiting and also too vague. So we ended up, okay, we're going to rebrand. We decided, and it was scary because obviously a rebrand, you never know what can happen. Is it going to make you lose customers? Is it going to be, a ton of money, a ton of time? Is it going to set you back? But we figured like the more we grow this business, the harder it's going to be to rebrand. So we might as well just rip the Band-Aid off and do it. Simultaneously, the reason I asked for clarification on like if you're talking about the brand or the name was because we also considered changing granola butter to oat butter because, granola can be anything. It can have nuts, it can have seeds. Like, what does that mean, granola butter? Where oat butter, we were the world's first oat-based spread. We figured, okay, that's pretty straightforward. But at the time, we actually sent out an email survey. We got like 5,000 replies from our customer base. Our customers are so loyal. It's insane. Like we didn't pay them or anything. We were just like, hey, can you help us out with this survey? Which like if any brand sent that to me, I'd be like spam. And we got so many replies, and it was, 99% of people said, keep granola butter. And what we realized is people eat our product because it tastes amazing. And if you see on the shelf granola butter versus oat butter and you have no idea what those two things are, like you're probably going to think granola butter tastes better. And, a lot of people said oat butter tastes or sounds like it tastes bland and, raw oats. And so our whole thing is taste forward everything, which is why we just kept the name granola butter. But we did change the name to Oat Haus because we wanted, almost like Oatly, we wanted to give people some, anchor like point of, okay, there's oats in here. So that's why we did that. And we figured, it was narrow enough, but also wide enough where we could launch a bunch of other products and not like pigeonhole ourselves too much into spreads.
I love it. And you mentioned the very loyal customer base, which I think honestly for any company, I think that is so important. What do you attribute that to?
Oh yeah, that's one of my most proud and, my favorite things about our brand. And, you see a lot of companies out there, maybe they have 100,000 followers on Instagram, but they don't get any comments because they've bought all their followers. And I think for us, we just, since day one, I treated our Instagram account like it was my personal diary. And that's how I grew my following on my personal account. And I was like, I want to take people along this journey from starting, like, I would post stories, or content like in my parents' garage where we started packing orders, sweating, crying, like literal blood, sweat, and tears, just like, what am I doing with my life? It wasn't pretty. It wasn't cute. It wasn't glamorous. And I think people, they love to root for an underdog. They love to, feel like they're part of something. And I never wanted people to feel like, oh, look at us. Look at this glossy brand. I wanted to show the real instead of the highlight reel. And that has really resonated with people. One thing that has been tricky as we've grown, though, is scaling that and scaling myself in our content. Yeah. So like many founders will outsource content creation because it's not their strong suit or they don't enjoy it, which is totally fine. But it is my strong suit and I love it. So that's been difficult, is like, okay, how do I outsource some parts of content creation? Because obviously we're putting out a ton of content on a bunch of different platforms, but still maintain that personal touch of like, hey, I'm the founder and like, here's my story, which you just can't replicate with like, a UGC creator or something like that.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And it shows the power that you've created in being authentic and in being real, which is so important. So, Allie, I want to know, what advice do you have for aspiring entrepreneurs who, like yourself, didn't come from an entrepreneurial background, but have this passion, maybe stumbled upon this passion, but more often than not, there's a very big fear of starting, and if anything, it just stays in our heads as an idea. What advice do you have to actually take that leap and go forward with it?
My favorite piece of advice I heard, again, I feel bad because I never hear where I don't remember who told me this back then, but it's like it stuck with me. So whoever is listening who told me this, I'm sorry I didn't credit you. But early on, someone told me, you're never, when I was also deciding, do I leave Doximity? Do I do this? Like, I have such a
Yeah.
secure thing going with my tech job. And someone told me, maybe it was a friend, like, you're never going to look back, say you're on your deathbed, you're 100 years old, hopefully, God willing, we live that long. And you're never going to look back and regret going for it. Like, you're never going to regret it, but you're always going to regret, oh, say, 10 years down the line, someone else launched a granola butter and I didn't do it. And I was like I had that idea. And I would be so mad at myself. And I think that always stuck with me of like, I want to be someone at the end of my life where like I have crazy stories and my grandkids are like, wow, like she has lived so many different lives. And like Oat Haus for me, it's not the end of like, I'm going to do 100 other things in my life. Like right now it's been amazing to build this company, but I have so many other ideas up my sleeve outside of food. And, I think what's hard being a founder too sometimes is, which I'm learning, and this is all learning experience, but I think like what I actually am really good at is the 0 to 1 and like ideating, almost like being an inventor, like having those ideas and then passing them off to someone else to run the company. I don't know if it's my raging ADHD or just that I have so many like shiny object syndrome, but 6 years in, it's like, I'm so proud of what we built and I would love to do something else, like I'm just antsy and I'm kind of like, okay, I'm ready for something new, but I also had invested so much in this, like, and I'm stubborn that I'm not going to just be like, all right, I'm done with this. Like, I'm going to see it through. But I think a lot of founders find themselves in that position where they're like, they just had this idea and now they're expected to run, we have a team of 30 people now. And I'm like, I've never been a CEO before. I don't know how to manage people. Like, I just need to figure that out too. So, I'm sorry, I'm kind of like tangenting, but
No, this
back
is
to
great.
the main point is just like, yeah, you're never going to regret like taking that action, even if it
Yeah.
fails.
And if anything, I could argue you're never ready per se, or at least like the ready that you intend to be. Because,
So,
like you said, you have a team of 30 people, you've never managed, you've never been a CEO before. But again, you have to just go in with it. Like, you don't have a choice, and you're going to learn and you're going to make mistakes on the way. So I think that's so important to mention. And Ali, I have a few more questions. One is, what have you learned now looking at your overall journey with Oat Haus? Like you said, 5,000 retailers, started off with, Pressed and Whole Foods Market. What have you learned most about yourself throughout this whole journey?
mm, that's a really good question. Oh, I think that my empathy and my emotions are actually, and my intuition are actually my superpower. Especially, I think a lot of female founders, and food is it's not as like male dominated, but a lot of industries, it's like, you kind of have to like, piss with the pups. You got to like, hang out with the boys and kind of like play
Yeah.
that masculine role. And that's important, of course. Like, yes, like numbers, keeping a business afloat, paying rent, it's all important, paying your employees. But I think there's this superpower that a lot of female founders have, and just women in general, which is like this empathy, this, the role of the nurturer. And I definitely bring that with my two male co-founders, where it's like, Eric and I will leave a meeting and I'll tell him, I'll mention like, did you get a weird vibe from that person? And he's like, no, like, what do you mean? Like, he doesn't sense it at all. And I'm like, I can't explain it, but like, we cannot do a deal with these people, which like sounds crazy, right? But then like fast forward, say, I do follow my intuition. We don't partner with these people. Like, something comes out that they're, I don't know, like bad people or whatever. And my intuition has never led me wrong. It's like that little voice, that gut feeling. And it's going back to what I was talking about at the beginning. Like, it's just the thread of my life, the theme. But I think sometimes that's really hard to listen to in business because so much is on the line. And sometimes it's just inexplicable. You can't explain certain things, or vice versa. You're like, I really know that like we need to launch this product and I know it doesn't make sense or, financially, but I know it's going to be a banger. So I think that's my greatest superpower. And that's what I've learned over the years is every time I stay true to that inner voice and that intuition, it doesn't lead me
I
astray.
love it.
But the times that I second guess it, or I think other people around me know better about my business, that's when, shit hits the fan.
Ooh, no, that's good. That is so good. Something I ask at the end of every episode to my guests is, what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
Mm, what craft? I think the craft of sharing my story in an authentic way that allows it opens the space and allows other people to share their stories. That's one. I have two actually.
Yeah, please.
The second one I would say is the craft of not being a people pleaser. I think I'm like such a recovering people pleaser. And I think that
It's a good way of putting it. Recovering people
yeah,
pleaser.
I mean, oh, it's so hard. And I think like business will, really force you. You can't be people pleaser, obviously. But yeah, just I think it is a craft because I think it also is a superpower when, you know that interpersonal skills, right? It's like you can't just be this hard ass, like blunt, like, elbow everyone out of your way to get what you want. Like I think I've actually gotten so many things, and that's not the reason that I've been nice, but like because you're nice and you are interested in other people and like the networking and all of that. But it is a craft of like balancing being kind and interested in other people and holding your own, not letting people walk all over you.
Totally.
I've just noticed that, like standing up for yourself. So that
Yeah.
is, yeah, I would say that's actually probably more my answer just because it's something I'm like constantly working on.
That's a great one. And like no is a full sentence, that type of thing where you can say no. Yeah, that's a good one. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So, by the way, with your first one of telling your story authentically, I would argue you're doing an absolutely excellent job with that, especially, on this podcast and talking to you. So, I want to thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours more. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your story and coming on She Leads.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This was great.